Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. My name is Jeff Short, and I'll be walking through an article today we're going to be looking at in Time Magazine. I don't know if you get Time Magazine, but we're going to be looking at an article from Time Magazine today called "The Gene Editing Revolution is Already Here." And it's an article that involves the author. She's a researcher, and she's done a lot of breakthrough work in gene editing. Her name is Jennifer Doudna, and she is the professor at Berkeley, California, University of Berkeley, California, University of California at Berkeley, and she is one of the co-discoverers of Crispr, the gene editing technology that's spreading all over the world. Now, I want to address this issue from a Christian perspective, and I'd like to talk about the implications of this technology from a Christian perspective. And what that means is we're going to look at her article here in Time Magazine, and we're going to talk about the implications of her article. Now, I read through this article, and I was struck immediately by just some really naive thinking on her part, overly optimistic thinking on her part, thinking the best for humanity, but not considering what can actually go wrong. And from a Christian viewpoint, because we believe in the fallenness of humanity, we believe in the pervasiveness of sin and selfishness and the works of the flesh, as the Bible describes them, the pride of life, so on and so forth. We understand that with great power requires great responsibility. Unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, fallen humanity, and you're not going to get things working out right. You're going to get things that fail, that fall apart, because you have the sinful human nature involved. So let's look at this article, and I'll let you know, inform you what I'm talking about as we go into it. So let's jump into the article. The article begins with Jennifer Doudna saying, ever since the discovery of the structure of DNA in 1950s, scientists, scientists have been dreaming about rewriting the code of life. Now, right off the bat, there is a red flag that should go up in everyone's mind, and that is the dream of rewriting the code of life. That is taking on the role of God. And I don't know about you, but I don't have the dream of rewriting the code of life. I guess some megalomaniacs, some power-crazed leaders have always dreamed that they could become God, they could become as God. But I don't want anyone to be able to have the power of rewriting the code of life. And I think her understanding of this, it's not stated specifically here already, but I think her unstated opinion is that, well, we could do so much good if we could rewrite the code of life, because the code of life is flawed. The code of life is imperfect. We have all kinds of problems with the code of life. And so if we could just get our hands on that code of life, written in the DNA, we could correct all the problems that, quote, nature created, close quote. And so here is a human being, a scientist, saying that she can rewrite and do better than the Creator in creating human life. And we got the same idea, attitude from the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins when he goes through the human body. If you've read any of his books, he will often break out into a criticism of the human body and say, well, you know, if God were really the designer, if there was really a designer of the human body, he would have not created this organ here, and he would not have designed this. For example, the eye, he would not have designed the eye that would then be obscured, the light obscured by all of the connections to the eyeball. He would have put the connections out of the way, not so that the light has to go through all of these messy connections, the way the eye is actually wired in nature. He would have corrected that if he were the creator. And he goes through other parts of the body. If you read his books, he'll talk about, for example, there are actually the process of giving birth. He says that's all designed wrong. That's all flawed. That if he were the designer, he would have created ample space and for the birth canal and so on and so forth. It's just a criticism of God, the creator. And he said he would have rewritten all kinds of the program that humans actually have for their DNA. So here we have a scientist, Jennifer Doudna, making the statements, scientists have been dreaming about rewriting the code of life. That is a prideful statement. What she could have said was improving genetic flaws, improving imperfections that have crept into the DNA, and so on and so forth. That would be more in line with the biblical Christian understanding of our place in the universe below God. When doctors do their work, they're not trying to rewrite the health of a person. They're not trying to rewrite the code of life. They're simply trying to correct flaws and mistakes that have come into the human body, and that is perfectly in line with the flaw, not the flaw, but the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. All of nature is fallen. Humanity is fallen. All of creation is fallen into sin, and that threw off everything. And so we live in a fallen world. So there is a place for the vision of getting people healthy, of correcting genetic mistakes, but not rewriting the code of life. The rewriting the code of life is like a godlike thing, and humans should not be speaking in those terms. So right off the bat, we see this humanistic secularism creeping in. She goes on and says, what if we could correct genetic mutations that cause disease in order to radically improve human health? Fine, that is a great vision. Harnessed from the naturally occurring immune system that bacteria use to defend themselves against viruses. CRISPR-Cas9 is a revolutionary once-in-a-generation tool that offers the real potential to quickly and efficiently achieve what was once thought impossible. So here she's talking about this CRISPR breakthrough, which she was a part of, that actually is a almost supernatural, powerful tool that can actually go in and rewrite the genetic code, the DNA code in a human individual. This is incredible. This is more powerful, potentially long-term, than even nuclear energy, the discovery, splitting the atom, the atomic bomb, nuclear power, and so on and so forth. This CRISPR technology is actually even more potentially powerful than the nuclear scientific technology that was discovered during World War II. So, yes, there is definitely the potential for a lot of good. There's also the potential for a lot of bad to happen. So let's go on. Since 2012, the technology has been adopted rapidly, transforming basic research, drug development, and diagnostic and agriculture. In the past 7 years, over 15,000 papers containing the term CRISPR have been published, and hundreds of different organisms have been edited. CRISPR has become a mainstream topic of conversation, fodder for Hollywood scriptwriters, and the standard genome editing tool used globally. As we move into a new decade, it is clear that the CRISPR-based applications will help us tackle societal challenges, including disease, food production, environmental sustainability. So she mentions the Hollywood screen and script writers. And this Actually, something similar to this was discussed in a movie called um, I Am, what is it? What is it? With Will Smith, I Am Legend. And the first part of the movie, they show an interview with a female scientist who claims to have come up with a cure for cancer, and it involves working at the genetic level. And so she's very proud, the scientist, of her work, even though she tries to be very humble. And she says this has a 100% cure rate. Well, then they fast forward a year or two later, and half the world's population is dead or either dying from this genetic abnormality that is spread because of that so-called breakthrough cure for cancer. So tinkering with the DNA has the potential of cataclysmic results. And that's probably what she's referring to here about Hollywood scriptwriters are talking about this too. But there is no question that this technology is now quickly spreading. She says, I receive daily emails from people suffering from debilitating genetic diseases asking how, and especially when, CRISPR can fix what is hardwired in their DNA and often runs in their family. For many diseases like Huntington's and Tay-Sachs, they know the gene that causes the diseases but have so far been powerless to change it. But now, thanks to CRISPR revolution, we can shift the paradigm entirely. Sickle cell research in the Innovative Genomics Institute, where I'm executive director, and elsewhere show we can proactively mitigate and correct the mutation that causes the illness. Gene editing treatments for this and other diseases are beginning or will soon enter clinical testing. The gene editing revolution has led to a rapidly growing CRISPR economy, and over the next decade, the technology will likely produce tangible and potentially wide-ranging treatments and even cures for genetic diseases. So basically what she has come up with, along with some others, is a way to edit out the genetic abnormalities and defects in the DNA. So they can go into a person's DNA and edit out the harmful genetic codes that produce some of these bad diseases, which is a great thing. It's a great thing for humanity. But the problem is, what's the downside? Well, because you're tinkering with the basic building blocks of life, the potential is you can abuse this technology to create almost anything like monsters, super soldiers. There can be genetic mistakes made by those who do the gene splicing and editing, and you can come up with sort of freaks of nature. You can build genetically superior athletes. You could craft, if enough people had the will to do this, they could create an entire army of super soldiers with superior physical traits and agility and intelligence. And it's mind-boggling what can be done with this gene editing tool. And this is now in the hands of a lot of people because the process, once it's understood, can be done a lot easier than, say, someone wanting to build a nuclear weapon or even a nation wanting to build a nuclear arsenal. That takes a lot of material that most people cannot get their hands on. Even nation states cannot get their hands on that nuclear material to build a nuclear device. But this CRISPR technology is a lot simpler for a lone individual or a nation to produce. So we have the potential danger here. For all the promise of CRISPR, enduring responsibility use is ongoing challenge. Well, let me read that again. That's a big key statement. For all the promise of CRISPR, ensuring responsible use is an ongoing challenge. In other words, the challenge is to keep this out of the hands of the mad scientists, the evil people who would do damage to the world for their own egos, and put it in the hands of the right people who are responsible, who will do good. That's what she's saying. Almost a year ago, scientist He Jiankui shocked the world by revealing that he had edited the embryos of twin girls. Now, He shocked the world. Really? Was it that shocking? If you have this technology and you can use it, what's so shocking if someone does use it? Really, I don't think she really believed what she just wrote. She said, this scientist in China shocked the world by revealing that he had edited the embryos of twin girls. In other words, he had gone into these twin girls in their mother's womb, and he had edited their DNA. And she said the world was shocked. But anyone who understands the fallen nature of humanity, any Christian, especially any Christian scientist, and I don't know if she's a Christian, I don't know what her beliefs are. I would guess that she's not, because she wouldn't have been shocked. If something is possible, then people will do it. Once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. And I don't think it really shocked anybody, except people who didn't even know about this technology, that someone would use it on a human being. And it will be used on human beings. And it probably is being used on human beings right now as we speak, but nobody is talking about it, or it's unknown, and they're doing it in secret. But of course it's going to be used. If it's out there, it's going to be used. It was a medically unnecessary experiment that radically broke the global consensus that CRISPR should not currently be used in a clinical human germline editing. It broke the consensus. Wow. That is pretty lame. She's acting shocked, and she's acting offended that a scientist would, quote, break the consensus. A consensus? Scientists break the consensus all the time. Consensus is a weak thing. Consensus just means scientists more or less around the world have said, hey, we really shouldn't be using this on human beings because it will lock in the genetic traits that we edit in or edit out, and it will be passed on to future generations through human reproduction. So in other words, this scientist in China edited the embryo of these twin girls in their mother's womb in China, and then when those girls grow up, that edit that was done in China will be reproduced in the next generation of children, and then those children will reproduce that edit, and so on and so on. So that edit that was done in China by this rogue scientist will pass on from generation to generation. That's very dangerous, because if there's a genetic defect that is even mistakenly introduced into the DNA, then it'll be passed on from generation to generation. And she's saying that him doing that in China broke global consensus. Well, that means it did nothing. It broke nothing. Consensus is about as weak as you can get. That isn't at all shocking. It says that germline editing is that which making genetic changes that can be passed down to future generations. The scientific community responded by redoubling efforts to establish stronger safeguards. Well, that means nothing. The scientific community. Okay, who's in the scientific community, and who speaks for the scientific community, and what does it mean when they are redoubling efforts to establish stronger safeguards? All that means is that they're trying to, or they're saying, hey, yeah, we should have stricter laws against this, and we should do more to encourage compliance to the scientific consensus of the time, which is about as weak as you can get. Encourage a more deliberate approach and deepen public conversation about responsible use. Responsible use in a fallen world. Wow. The World Health Organization is now pushing government regulators to act. We need oh boy, I'm sure the world governments are trembling because the World Health Organization is now pressuring them to push for greater regulatory acts. That means nothing also. See how weak all of this is? This is a case in point. The scientists have some knowledge. They have this in terms of during World War II, the world was introduced to nuclear power, nuclear energy. And look how quickly it spread all over the globe. So now you have these rogue nations like North Korea that have nuclear weapons. You have China, this huge, huge communist, central, godless, atheistic, materialistic nation. China has a huge nuclear weapons arsenal. You have Russia. You have European nations. You have India. You have Pakistan. You have the United States. You go down the list, you have many, many nations of the world that have nuclear power. How did they get that technology? Well, because once the knowledge was available and once the nations had access to the resources and the materials they needed to create this weapon, they then went ahead and did it. And that's the same way that's going to happen with CRISPR. You're going to have North Korea, you're going to have China. China already has. You're going to have all these different nations, even individuals, mad scientists, terrorist groups, you name it. They're going to all use this CRISPR technology to do, some are going to do good and others are going to do bad. And it's out there. And the scientific community is basically helpless. And so is the World Health Organization, and so is all this other talk about regulation. We need compliance, not moratorium, as the former invites conversation, which is critical since interest in editing the genome is not going away. Conversation is not going to stop these rogue mad scientists or these rogue nations. Scientific consensus is not going to stop it either. So that's pretty naive to think that the power of the scientific consensus is going to do anything. It's not. During CRISPR's teenage years, we will look to expand the type of edits we can make, focusing on advancing the safe and effective delivery of CRISPR genomic engineering tools, work through the first wave of Food and Drug Administration approvals, and increase our exploration of the naturally occurring way to fine-tune CRISPR-based editing to improve accuracy. So they're going to tweak it, they're going to work on it, they're going to continue to work on it. There is a possible future where genetic disease is a thing of the past, where we routinely sequence DNA and treat harmful mutations as an outpatient procedure. Yes, that's the good. There is a great potential for this technology in really alleviating a lot of human suffering and eliminating a lot of the diseases and problems, even possibly cancer, from the DNA. And we know, as a Christian, from the biblical standpoint, a lot of the harmful effects in our biology were caused by the fall and caused by the catastrophic effects of the fall. But, and that's not the only potential for this technology. There's great evil. And I think we begin to see the naive approach. And this is the problem with a lot of utopian schemes like communism. Marxism was a naive utopian vision. And a lot of the liberal, so-called progressive leftist ideas always fail to take into consideration the fallen nature of man. And Christians can't let that happen. We need to be the reminders that say, hey, humanity is good, but it's also bad. And there's good and there's bad, and we have to beware of the bad. It says that, but we must ensure that in this future, everyone will have access to these new technologies. Well, we don't want everyone. We don't want the bad people to have access to technologies. Come on. You know, again, there's so much idealistic, utopian naivete in this article coming from an intelligent scientist. And there's a consensus on rules to regulate whether and how this technology is applied to the human germ-line, which will not be obeyed by individuals, nor will it be obeyed by nations. Consensus is not law. This must come from a collaborative effort that includes increased private and public investment, more commercial partnership to reduce the financial risk and scale the technology, and the political and regulatory nuance to allow widespread affordable access to safe, effective cures without stifling a technology that will underpin the health of future generations. Okay, so we see the vision that she has for this technology, but unfortunately, we don't see the realism that what's going to happen because of the sinful human nature of man is that this technology will probably, unfortunately, be used by sinful human beings and sinful groups, nations, organizations to destroy the human race, to destroy the planet in an attempt, and it might even be an attempt with good goals and good motives, but when you start playing God, and this is almost about as close to playing God as you can get. So we need to really be praying that God will somehow supernaturally safeguard humanity from this powerful tool. This tool has the potential of going into human DNA and rewriting it. And it has the potential of, for example, if a certain area of the DNA is located intelligence, you could actually go in and re-edit that and increase intelligence in individuals. Or if you can isolate muscle tone and all kinds of other things, you can go in there and enhance muscle structure and so forth. This has so much potential for harm. I cannot even believe that she would write such a glowing, optimistic article and not facing the reality is this is one of the most scariest technologies that have come about, even scarier than nuclear energy. And so we need to be praying to God that we don't see the very worst that can happen here, because there is a lot that can really happen and bring about catastrophe. Well, I wish I could say more positive about this, but I'm afraid I see down the future and I see what human beings are, and I see the sinful nature. And unless the Lord Jesus Christ doesn't come back, we're going to see some pretty bad stuff come down the pipe here with this new gene editing revolution. So leave you on a more optimistic note. God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things. So we need to be in prayer and ask God to have mercy on us on the planet Earth, and keep looking to Jesus. We'll see you next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.